Welcome everybody for coming out or staying home on this very, very cold New England evening. And we're here because we're gonna give some updates on what we kind of all finished last year in terms of a restoration plan, and then we're very excited to be able to give some actual updates on implementation, which is, I think, pretty special to be able to have a project that's really got some components already moving forward. So, a quick intro for folks who don't know us. My name's Max Rome. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager at the Charles River Watershed Association. So we are, a nonprofit group that works for the health and restoration of the Charles River. We've been around since 1965, coming up on a big anniversary this year. And our work is organized in a couple different project areas. We focus on climate resilience, so dealing with flooding and the human impacts of climate change. We have a river science program to look at, really understand how the Charles River is responding to changes in use. We look at restoration, which is kind of focused on ecological health. Stormwater solutions, which is very much focused on preventing stormwater pollution. That's the major source of pollution to the Charles River. And then education and outreach. And I think what's really special about Cheesecake Brook is this is a project that, hits every single one of these areas. As folks know. So we do this at the beginning of our presentations. This is just an acknowledgement that our watershed, the cities that we live in, we're not the first people to live here, and we acknowledge the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc nations as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land and water. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to run through a little bit of the history of this project. How is it that the Cheesecake we know today, got its shape? What are we seeing? What aren't we seeing? And then we're going to give some updates on, pardon this formatting, but we're going to give some updates on the project itself, looking at what's going into the ground in the next couple of years, reviewing a restoration plan that we worked on last year, and then giving some updates on what's next and what to kind of stay tuned for. So a little bit of context. We like to show the watershed, the Cheesecake Brook subwatershed in the context of the Charles. So, Cheesecake Brook is about 6 square miles, and the watershed is about 304 square miles. But, at CRWA, we really feel like this brook is super important. It's it's an urban tributary, and the potential opportunities to restore urban waters are very, very limited. But this brook has a couple qualities that make it, really a great candidate for restoration. And it's one of the first brooks, it's one of the first tributaries that's upstream of the Watertown Dam. So, folks may know that we've got a big focus on trying to take out the Watertown Dam and return some of the migratory fish up to this stretch of the river. And we were just, we're actually on site this morning for a very fun but very cold site walk with some folks from the Native Fish Coalition. And later this summer, they're going to be out and they're going to try and do a real survey to understand, okay, what fish are at that confluence at the Charles, who's missing from Cheesecake Brook, and that's going to help us kind of have a more science-informed approach to this restoration project. And then, I imagine many of you have already seen this picture, but, this area of Newton was really, really wet. It was a kind of swampy, marshy area, and it started getting, drained in the 1800s to make way for agriculture, and then eventually for residential development. And the brook, that we really know right now, this is something that was really constructed in 1937, and it was part of the Works Public Administration. We recently found a pretty cool digitized flyer from 1937 that advertised the completion of this project. So back then, this area was flooding. WPA built this masonry wall to kind of keep it clear. But, since 1937, this is a map of all the impervious surfaces within the watershed, within this subwatershed. So about 40% of the Cheesecake Brook subwatershed is paved. Water can't soak into the ground. So we went from a landscape that was very, very marshy, very, very wet, water stayed for a long time, to a landscape that's really pretty hard. And now most of the water that's entering Cheesecake Brook, to the best of our knowledge, is really, most of it is coming into the brook through stormwater pipes, which means it's entering the brook very, very quickly. And when it rains, it means it's entering the brook all at once. And you guys know better than me what the consequence of that is, which is flooding. And then kind of the flip side of flooding is drought and really low flow, which I haven't been able to see in my time with Cheesecake Brook, but I'd love to hear kind of what people have observed about that. So it's an urbanized water body. There's all sorts of special challenges that come with that. There's, this phrase that we like to use called urban stream syndrome. It's kind of like an illness that affects urban streams where the water temperatures tend to be very high. They're kind of flashy, which is what we describe. They're either flooding or they're pretty dry. One of the big characteristics is just this kind of degraded habitat. There's not a lot of room for plants. There's not a lot of room for pools and kind of changes in condition, which is what a lot of creatures need to survive. And then, a big piece of this is stormwater pollution, which, I think is just visualized very beautifully here by the asphalt swales, as we call them, which take stormwater off of Albemarle Road and just kind of deposit it right into the brook. So this is, this is a wonderful poster child for some of the challenges of being an urban stream. It's hard to be Cheesecake Brook, and it's just going to get harder in our climate future as things get hotter and wetter. Just to remind folks of where we've been, this is a project that, at least for CRWA's involvement, kind of really kicked off during the pandemic. Although Emily Norton, who's not here today, tells a great story about the first time she heard of CRWA. They were knocking on her door to bug her about Cheesecake Brook. So, we've been at this for a little while. But last year we got a grant to do some restoration planning and look at projects that could be implemented in kind of the short, medium, and long term. And I'm just kind of sharing how we have started to think about the brook, that there's this kind of major section from Watertown Street down to the confluence, down to the Charles, which is open, which has that WPA masonry wall, and then these 25-foot sloping grass banks. Then it goes underground, under the pike, reemerges at McGrath Field, and then it's a really interesting, different condition where it's kind of wild, running through people's backyards, very, very rocky. It's got a lot of places where the water falls. It's got kind of more gradient to it, and then finally it kind of surfaces up in the Brayburn Country Club, which is so interesting. Yeah, and Cheesecake Brook in a lot of ways is similar to other urban water bodies, and I'm often amazed to realize that the headwaters for some of our tributaries are golf courses. I think maybe that was kind of prime territory at the time that people were building golf courses, a nice hill. So anyway, what we looked at is we looked at opportunities to do infiltration at Albemarle Field, opportunities to kind of correct some of the erosion and degradation with some of the outfalls that are entering the brook in this kind of more open section, and then looking at kind of comprehensive restoration planning. All right, and I'm going to do kind of one more kind of major update slide. So that's what we did in 2024. In 2025, we're really excited to announce that, the city of Newton has been awarded, worked with CRWA to get $1.4 million from the Massachusetts Vulnerability Program. that money has allowed us to add some really major green infrastructure and restoration components to this Albemarle Phase 1 playground project that was already moving full speed ahead. And I just want to say it's been really awesome working with the city of Newton on this. I think that the metaphor is kind of like the Millennium Falcon kind of coming out the hangar bay doors just to get all these things online for this project and to keep it on the implementation schedule that's already been set. So some of what we're going to be able to do, I'll use my cursor here, is a very large subsurface infiltration system that we'll talk more about, but this is a system that's going to kind of correct the urban drainage from about 6 acres of this neighborhood up here.
That's Craft Street.
Yeah, sorry, this is to orient us all. This is Craft Street. You know, this is Albemarle. Then there's going to be some bioretention basins and green infrastructure within the park. And then finally, some pretty major bank planting and mitigation that's along the brook itself. And I'm gonna hand this over to Aaron, who's gonna kind of walk us through the Albemarle Field project. And then Eric's gonna get into some of the details on the stormwater components. Here's your clicker.
Great, thank you. So, thank you, Max, for the overview. As Max mentioned, Albemarle Field is having a big reconstruction renovation project going on. Craft Street along the north, and then Cheesecake Brook along the west. Oh, sorry, my name is Aaron Lerman. I'm the Assistant Director of Parks and Open Space with the City of Newton. And so I've been working a little bit on this Fields project and a bit on the planting. So the field in the red boundary, as identified, is the first zone that's going to be improved. There's going to be a turf multi-purpose field happening there. And there's going to be baseball fields that are going to be happening. There's a few things that are there now that are going to be moved around. Some courts relocated, basketball courts relocated. Some courts are going to be repurposed into pickleball courts, which are new basketball court, new softball field, as well as baseball field, as I mentioned. And the field is going to include ADA accessible pathway and a renovated multi-use trail that goes through it for accessibility as well. There's going to be new lighting. I think the old poles, I think just came down recently. So new lighting going in is exciting, and irrigation will be provided to the fields that will keep them nice and fresh. So this is the phase that's happening now. There's some demo work happening. There's site prep happening right now as weather conditions allow, of course. And that'll continue through the spring where the field and stormwater basin will be worked on. And then I'll hand it over to that whole phase that in red will be done by this summer. That's all fiscal year 25, so that has a deadline here. And then we'll be moving into the next phase of plantings and path work afterwards. So plantings likely to happen starting this summer and into the fall.
Excuse me, when you say fiscal year 25, so Newton's fiscal year starts in July, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying you expect to have it done in June by then?
The field's expected to be done, by.
And is that entire red part? That is what you're considering the field, or are you talking to us about
the red part, the red part,
including the pickleball courts?
I believe so. Yeah. I believe so. I don't know. I mean, at least I don't know if it's not to be ready to. I'm not gonna say it's ready to play on, but the things that in the red box that, from as far as I understand, is scheduled to be done at the end of this fiscal year. They're working hard. Yeah, they've started already. They're really good with it.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a couple clarifying questions, or you want me to hold them?
I don't know, Max, how do you wanna do that?
We will have time for questions at the end. We're gonna go through all of the projects in this area and then talk about it.
So with that, I'll hand it over to Eric and he'll talk a little bit more about the stormwater infiltration that's happening under the multi-purpose field in the red outline. We'll dive into that briefly.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Hires. I'm the environmental engineer for Newton DPW. And I've had the pleasure of being able to work with the CRWA on some prior grant work that has led us up to this point, and into our MVP grant with the state. We're very thankful to have been awarded $1.4 million by the state in the form of this MVP grant for the various stormwater control measures that we're going to be inputting as part of this project. And so with that, I'll get into some of the details. We have three major components. And in the respective order of installation, we're going to start here with the Craft Street infiltration system. So this is going to be a large subterranean chamber that's going to be underneath the multi-purpose field. And the idea of this is to intercept the Craft Street main drain. So that's the large pipe that's heading from the east to the west and outfalls into Cheesecake Brook beneath that bridge. Now, this drain services about 7 acres of area, both pervious and impervious. And we're designing the system to accommodate the 25-year storm. So it's going to have about 47,000 cubic feet of storage during heavy rain events. And we're expecting this to remove roughly about 6 pounds of phosphorus per year. And the whole idea with phosphorus being a pollutant is that normally, when you have leaf litter or any kind of organic matter that's decaying on a regular pervious area, that would go back into the ground and filter through the soil, be taken up by plants to support the growth of the plant tissue. But with development in such an urbanized area as Newton, all of this impervious area causes that runoff and all the phosphorus to drain directly into a nearby waterway, in this case, Cheesecake Brook. So the idea of intercepting this drain line is we are taking this large 7-acre area and we are giving it the stone volume or the void volume to accommodate all of that water and get it back into the groundwater to filter out any pollutants. Of course, this is going to have an overflow connection that ties back into the Craft Street main drain, and that will basically future-proof it for any more intense storms, and we won't have any backup. And right here we have an example of what that subterranean storage might look like. Okay.
I think I must be responsible for that.
Uh-oh.
Still working on my share.
Okay, we're just off of our screen
I
here.
think it's the TV.
Well, anyway, this is going to be a large open chamber beneath the multi-purpose field. And they're going to be made of these interlocking systems called R tanks, which will allow for the water to build up to a certain level before it triggers the overflow. And all of those R tanks are going to be surrounded in crushed stone, which allows the water a means of percolating back into the soil during these rain events. So as you can see here, we have that layer of grass or turf up top, and then there's going to be a layer of medium underneath. Ultimately, we'll then have some filter fabric to separate the crushed stone and the R tanks from any fill that's on top. And as you can see, these are systems that are made to interlock and create a large subterranean void.
There is an online question about what would happen if the infiltration system were to fill with sediment.
So we have an operations and maintenance plan drafted and will be put in place post-construction. And that falls on the responsibility of Newton DPW to do these inspections and perform any maintenance. We will have both an inlet and an outlet for this structure so that we can see if any water is either being discharged from the system, indicating an overflow, or if there's any clog at the inlet. The inlet's going to be comprised of what's called a hydrodynamic separator, and this will basically make it so any kind of debris or pollutants such as tire wear or litter, that'll be filtered out of the water that's going into the system in the ground and provide DPW with a centralized means of removing all of that and preventing any kind of failure. Current O&M plan will be inspecting this about 2 times a year. So one of the other components of this big project are bioretention basins. These are going to be throughout that phase 1 area. And the idea is a natural kind of man-made depression filled with native plantings and having a sort of think of a raised catch basin. And this basically allows for stormwater runoff to collect in these basins and pond up to a certain level. And should a storm event trigger it, all of that water, once it hits the top of that raised catch basin or inlet, will then overflow into a nearby drain network. In this case, it is a drain line that runs underneath Albemarle Field that services the FA Day School and the upstream neighborhood. So it's an existing piece of infrastructure. But some of these basins are going to be around like the ADA accessible pathways or any of the new sports courts. It's kind of difficult to make out here, but this is a snippet from one of our plan sets. For the people online, if they could see my mouse, it's these kind of rounded contours, both in between the pathway and the new sports courts, as well as up north. And these are, again, there's 4 of them here. There's going to be 2 up north around those new pathways. And these are to service sheet runoff. So obviously with the new pathways, the new courts, that's impervious area, which contributes to pollution. So the idea here is to create that compensatory storage.
The field as well, right? Since it's turf.
Excuse me?
The field as well, since it's turf.
The multi-use field up north? Yeah, so that has its own drainage system that's separate from these basins, and that's to prevent any kind of ponding or mitigate or migration of turf material. These are solely for any kind of new walkways or sport courts. And these are going to have about 6,000 cubic feet of compensatory storage. And we're estimating that these will remove approximately 1 pound of phosphorus per year. And lastly, we have the bank restoration and the biofiltration structures that we're going to be putting in. So we're going to be removing those asphalt swales, not throughout the entire span of the brook, but within that mitigation area. And we're going to be replacing them with bioswales. So these are going to be kind of similar footprint to those asphalt swales, except the idea is that they will, instead of concentrate the runoff right into the brook, they are going to disperse it and spread it out. So the benefits of that is that it slows the runoff, and that allows the water to naturally sink into the soil and reduce any kind of erosion. And we're going to have these rain guardian turrets along the line, along the roads that will allow for sediment to be collected and removed easily and prevent any large pollutants or litter from getting into the brook. And again, we're estimating about 1 year of phosphorus removed per year.
Someone online did ask, what is the impact of 1 pound of phosphorus on the environment?
Oh, shut the fuck up.
So 1 pound of phosphorus is rather minuscule. But for instance, when it comes to the city of Newton and how we have a large boundary area with the Charles River. And we are a relatively urbanized suburb of Boston. Uh, eutrophication that leads to poor conditions for aquatic life. So 1 pound by itself might not seem like a lot, but we're slowly chipping away at the thousands of pounds that we need to remove throughout the city.
Just real quickly, is that phosphorus mostly coming from leaf litter and stuff like that, or is it also a combination of all the tons of landscaping that people are doing?
So it's a combination. The largest source is currently leaf litter. And that's again because, you know, we're very urbanized and all that leaf litter, which is supposed to be decomposing into the ground, is instead being swept into the river. But, you know, yeah, landscaping, fertilizer use, pet and animal waste, all big contributors to phosphorus pollution.
And is that mitigation area, is that going to be for the whole culvert as it exists today? Is it gonna be built in with that culvert, or are they gonna remove the culvert?
Are you talking about the channel walls?
The channel walls, yeah.
So the channel walls are not going to be touched during this current project. And there's an important factor to that, is that on both sides of the brook, so on the northbound side and the southbound side, we have major MWRA sewer lines that service not just the Albemarle corridor, but much of, you know, West Newton, Newtonville, and the volume of these sewer lines is very high. If you actually go to the northernmost end of Cheesecake Brook, where it meets the Charles, in that DCR land, you could actually see one of the MWRA manholes and hear the volume that's going through it. So those channel walls are actually there to prevent erosion and prevent the brook banks from deteriorating to the part that it damages the infrastructure. So as of right now,
There to stay then, those cement culvert or the.
as of right now. And of course,
That goes for that slab too, at the end of
the spillway where it meets to Charles.
Yeah.
Yes, so right there, that's actually where the two
Yeah.
sewer mains meet. And it crosses right underneath that. And obviously, all of the restoration work, the bioretention basins, the bioswales are all gonna feature native plants to help support our native ecosystems.
So if those walls are staying, I'm sorry, I don't understand the pictures. If the walls of the brook are staying, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let
That picture, yeah, so the plants are just gonna be top, right, along where.
yeah, let me take
Yeah.
a stab at this.
Sure.
So, I'm gonna go back over here. To this picture, so in this blue, this is the area, and it's actually closer to an acre, it's about 43,000 square feet. And what's happening is in this whole section, the first thing that the contractor is gonna do is they're gonna go in and they're gonna strip the existing grass. Gonna cut out down to about 6 inches, so cut out all of that grass after they put up erosion fencing and all of that.
And the 6 inches is closer to the wall or closer to
No,
the
and
road?
sorry, and there's a 3-foot buffer on the road and about a 3-foot buffer on the river, so that whole middle stretch. Here, this is all gonna get stripped. And then this entire area is gonna get kind of minimally regraded. But replanted with a mix of, you know, native perennials and herbaceous plants. And then in the areas, this is kind of a cross section of it, in the area where there's now the asphalt swale. They're installing that turret, and then it spreads the flow, and the first thing that flow hits is one of those quar logs. I don't know if people can picture that. And that log is actually using a technique called live staking, where there's, you know, little willows and different little woody plants that are gonna root into that log into the brook. So the stormwater is being directed into kind of a more densely planted area where it's gonna kind of spread and slow down. But the effect is that this whole area, you know, almost an acre of bank is gonna go from lawn to meadow with herbaceous plants and in certain locations, trees.
And what is the scale of the turret? It looks huge from the,
Yeah, sorry, you certainly can't read this. Can you read this?
no.
3 feet is the diameter.
Okay.
So they're kind of set level to the ground.
Yeah.
So, you know, from the
So is it
roadway,
gonna be cement? Is it a cement structure?
it's a cement structure with a grate on the top and then a grate on the bottom, so
Does
kind
it
of.
look like a big giant manhole? A storm drain?
Yeah, it'll look a little bit like a storm drain,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And will it be landscaped in or just stick out like that?
It's gonna be kind of incorporated within the berm that's going to go up
Uh-huh.
along the limits of the restoration area.
Yeah, and that's an important kind of point to make, is right now there's no curb in a lot of places
Right.
in between the road and here, and you know, and people park on it and it causes
Yeah,
erosion.
yeah.
There's gonna be a curb, a new term that I'm learning, which is the bread loaf curb.
California curve, I've heard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's gonna be
Asphalt.
an asphalt curb. So now instead of kind of the runoff just going, you know, willy-nilly where it goes or going down these swales, it's gonna be directed towards these turrets and then kind of spread out from there.
So what is the long-term maintenance plan for the new plantings, the native plantings? Especially in light of the fact that we've had some recently pretty serious droughts.
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna invite Aaron up here too. And also, I'm just gonna say, we've jumped the gun, but we're here at questions and comments.
To add on to that, online is also wondering how invasive species will be monitored during maintenance and whether there will be any mowing involved with the banks.
Okay, yeah, we'll do a round robin
Sure.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, so the plantings that are happening is part of that mitigation area along the brook. As has been said, is it's a native selection of species with multi-season interest. We're gonna be filling in some gaps in the canopy. There's, you know, trees along the length of the street, so filling in gaps with more shade trees. And then filling in that space with a lot of herbaceous, low-growing, dense mid-plants, and shrubs, which are also somewhat low-growing, dense, and strong. So we want plants that are gonna be able to handle the ebb and flow of our rain cycles, drought, and infiltration. We want them to be able to handle anything with salt and other materials that come off of the street. So the selection, serviceberry, northern red oak, as woody plants are among that selection, and stuff that really handles wet. Stuff like the button bush and elderberry, they just love wet places. So all that water, you ask, where is it all coming from? We're being directed with that curb into these plantings. So hopefully they're gonna be established well. The planting has a 2-year warranty on it, so the contractor is gonna be responsible for maintaining them. That includes removing invasive plants. You know, at the end of 2 years, we would not accept a plant that was completely infiltrated by bittersweet. If our oak was being taken down by bittersweet, we would say, you gotta cut that off or replace it. So they're incentivized to continue to work and making sure that no invasive plants get a hold in here. So it's gonna be really nice to have that 2-year warranty. We're doing that on most of our plantings from now on. It works really well. There's going to be temporary establishment fencing up around the plantings to prevent immediate foot trampling and that sort of traffic happening on it. We've seen that type of fencing be successful for us as like Livingston Cove at Crystal Lake. That type of temporary fencing put up for a couple of years, and it really can help keep some of that foot traffic and trampling away to let the plants establish and thrive.
And how
So,
do they thrive in drought?
well, if, you know, it's a good question. If it turns out that it is an even worse drought in these next 2 years, they will be responsible for their establishments. That'll include watering. You know, I think for everyone's hoping that it's a normal year of precipitation and they get established nicely on their own, that would be wonderful. But we'll see what happens.
And I was just gonna add one thing too, which is that an aspect of this planting is that this is now gonna be a conservation easement. So there's a commitment for this to be maintained in perpetuity as a condition from the Conservation Commission. And the plan, basically, I'm just gonna reiterate what Aaron said, but there's a 2-year establishment period. And that's when we're kind of going, you know, doing everything that needs to happen, watering, weeding, to make sure that the plants take. But the idea is that this is gonna be a landscape that's low maintenance, that's maintained by seasonal mowing. And, you know, the kind of state of the art with this type of meadow establishment is that if you do good establishment, if you strip the turf to begin with, get things established well, then this seasonal mowing keeps invasives at bay pretty well.
So I noticed you haven't said anything about the iconic photograph at the beginning of this presentation of the car floating down the brook at the low point kind of across the street from my neighbor's house. I also happen to live on the upper end of Albemarle Road where the culvert is at its highest. I live not too far from Eddy Street. And so I have experienced some pretty serious flooding in my backyard because of the topography of the land goes like this on my property. So it seems that this is really, this plan, admirable plan is really being designed around the new turf and that whole very active area. And, you know, it seems the only place to be able to locate that massive drainage system in terms of the field was up by Craft Street. But when you say 7 acres, it seemed whoever said that was kind of pointing sort of, you know, at Craft Street and beyond, close to the river. And what about all the rest of us all along the whole stretch of Albemarle, all the way up to the end, farthest away from the river? And the impact not only on the flooding of the brook itself, which has been pretty serious, but also on the homes.
I can answer a little bit. Eric might want to speak more. You know, this project is happening as a unit, and I think that this is, as so happens, the drainage area, you know, as it matches up. But Eric can talk more, I think, about how they prioritize stormwater infrastructure and how they find places for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the major reasons that we're focusing on this area right now is because it happened to line up with Parks and Rec and their current Albemarle plan. We were able to kind of shoehorn this in at the last moment in collaboration with the CRWA and our kind of planning grant, which was our CZM grant in 2024. Now, there's a lot to be done about Cheesecake Brook. This is kind of the start. We're kind of internally looking at this as somewhat of a pilot project. Obviously, something along the lines of this Craft Street Basin that, you know, can accommodate a 25-year storm. That's not an easy thing to locate. And especially, you know, it's very dense around Cheesecake Brook. There's a lot of high density residential buildings. There's not a lot of places that we can put these structures because not only do we need a good, you know, empty area to put something like this and have a big construction project to accommodate it, but we're also limited by soils. A big part of these subsurface systems is that the soils in the area need to be able to accommodate all of that water. So when you were working with something like Cheesecake Brook, we have to kind of look at one of those earlier maps of Newton where this was an area requiring drainage. This all used to be wetland and marsh area. So, you know, obviously as we've urbanized, we've filled it in, but a lot of that wetland still remains, say, 4, 5, maybe 6 feet underground. And that is comprised of a very silty, dense material that doesn't like letting water through it. So if we're going around looking for places to put a system like this in, we come across a restrictive, silty, buried wetland, that kind of rules out that project. And makes it so we can't even consider even a smaller system. So we are very restricted in where we can put these systems. This is kind of a pilot project. I'm happy to talk about some other projects that we are doing throughout the Cheesecake Brook watershed later on in the presentation. But the idea is, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there. All of this 47,000 cubic feet of storage, that's removing volume from those floodwaters. And this is a start.
And so as I understand it too, is that's what, without this, the water backs up and creates that massive flooding on Albemarle, right in front of the.
In front of the pool.
Right,
In front of the gap.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have this, you know, as it begins to back up, it just has nowhere to go. Assuming this works as designed, it would reduce, you know, a scenario like that.
Yeah, well, we're trying to find places to remove volume from entering the brook in the first place.
So how would this? I don't
Sorry, she's
think
been raising her hands.
So, is
Oh, yeah.
the Dustin Street, project, also, isn't also on Cheesecake Brook?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The big project
It
that's
is.
right,
Yeah.
Dustin Street. that's
Dunstan
right,
Street?
Right behind it.
beyond Trader Joe's and.
Yeah, I believe.
And I'm wondering if, because they're doing a huge excavation project there, whether that,
So they're required by city ordinance to put in similar structures to mitigate volume from entering Cheesecake Brook.
So that should help.
Should help,
And
so
but again, it's, you
So
know, when
that's
you look at the
their-
numbers
their portion.
isolated. Yes, they are abiding by the
impervious.
city ordinance.
Whatever they're putting in for paving and buildings and all that.
Yes,
But that might help the sort of in-between areas to some extent.
correct.
Because the brook runs all behind that big construction project as well.
Yep, and the city of Newton has a very strict stormwater management ordinance that requires any new or redevelopment project that increases impervious area by over 400 square feet to put similar structures within their property limits to remove any additional volume from entering the city drainage network and ultimately Cheesecake Brook or another tributary.
And I have one other question when you were talking about the MWRA.
Mhm.
Did you say it's both sewer and water?
It's sewer,
It's only sewer.
it's only sewer, but there are other utilities that I can't go into excruciating detail of, but I know there's also gas.
Well, the only reason I'm asking about that is I know in Upper Falls, on the, aqueduct, that they're very specific about the trees that can grow because of the roots and not really wanting it to grow, into their,
And damage
aqueduct.
the, yeah,
So are they in on your plan? The
I'm
MWRA?
not sure.
yeah, this project is not gonna
It's,
impact
yeah,
those sewer lines.
Uh-huh.
And we are interested in getting the MWA in on this plan as we think about that slab, but that is not part of this
Oh,
project that's
okay,
moving
so
forward right
yes,
now.
the slab is way,
Yeah.
it's far.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, So we've got a little bit more to go through. Let's take this question, then we've got a question for all of you.
Does this end at 7:30?
Well, it's 7:20, so let's take this question, then let's try and get through the rest of our presentation. We'll have room at the end as well, yeah.
Okay, so I used to do stormwater management for DOT, state DOT. I think I met you, a little while back. So I have a bunch of questions about the stormwater system, and I won't bore the audience here. But let me just ask a couple, these hydrodynamic separators, how many of those are in Newton that the DPW maintains?
Throughout Newton,
Yes,
I don't have an exhaustive list of that.
but it's like a
but
dozen or
I-
50 or,
I do know that, the city of Newton has about, give or take, 30 stormwater structures similar to what we're putting in here, that some of them feature hydrodynamic separators that we do maintain, or inspect and maintain on a semi-annual basis.
they're devilishly hard to manage those things. And I'm just wondering how much, well, experience DPW has had with them. I mean, inspection, for example, very difficult to inspect because it's a chamber underground, I mean, you think about it. Yeah, you get a manhole and get a big chamber, it's,
Yeah.
you don't just like go, oh, hey, I mean, the whole thing is dark, you can't see what's in.
No, but I mean, it is part of the, I believe it's logged with the Conservation Commission, but you can actually take a look at our O&M plan that, goes into detail about the inspection protocol. But, I've played a role in the development of this idea, and we've made it very, very important that any kind of structure like a hydrodynamic separator is within easy access for us to get a Vector truck in. For instance, this one is going to be just off of Craft Street. It's not going to be within the actual field itself, but it'll provide us with a means of getting a Vector truck in there that's designed to clean it, exactly that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, we're seeing this as, this is best practice right now. There's a couple different ways to protect these subsurface infiltration systems, and having a hydrodynamic separator is kind of the preferred option. There's another option to have like an isolator row at the head of the system, but this is recommended.
I hate to say this, but when I worked for DOT, and I'm retired now, so I guess I can say it. Sometimes less was more, to be saddled with a problematic BMP infrastructure that was a bear to maintain and inspect and clean out, in perpetuity. Sometimes it's like, maybe it's just not practical.
And, I would agree that this is a very large BMP, one that's going to require thousands of dollars to maintain. But, the city of Newton is bound by the MS4 net use permit, and we have a responsibility to remove phosphorus and other pollutants from our drainage effluent. And this is one of the measures that the EPA wants to see, and is what's currently given the most credit for. And so we have to, play by their rules a bit. We've also made other strides in non-structural controls, but that's getting a bit off topic. But we have an O&M plan put in place to maintain the systems that we install in the city, and this one is going to fit within our current general O&M plan. Well,
Okay, Ralph, let's hear from.
You gotta listen to Brad.
Let's hear from Ralph, and then we've got a question for the audience. Yeah.
With all due respect, I'm a retired EPA.
We're both
I
retired.
spent a lot of time out on the Charles River and can see the increasing growth in aquatic vegetation every year. I mean, to do nothing is just not an option, foolish, I think. And I get it that sometimes things get over-engineered, but to just throw your hands up is, to me, is not an option.
Yeah. And I gotta go editorial here too, and just say, we've got really big problems on the Charles, and we've got really big problems at Cheesecake Brook. And, you know, the law of the land, the Clean Water Act says fishable and swimmable, and we are not living up to that. And what we need to do is we need to do things a little bit differently. And I think with this project, we've got a very intelligent set of strategies, some of which are gonna work perfectly, some of which we're gonna learn from. But that's what, you know, we all as a community kind of are racing towards over the next kind of couple decades.
There's one person raising their hand online. Then the chat also requests that we get back to the presentation.
Okay. Okay, should we,
Yeah, I think Nicole.
Nicole, do you wanna
Yep.
unmute and go ahead?
Hi, thank you. Nicole Banks, Commissioner of Parks, Recreation and Culture, and Max, Eric, Aaron, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. It's been really informative, and I agree. I'd love to get back to that too. I just want to kind of stress for everybody here, first of all, it's great to see so many people online. Can't really see the room, but looks like there's a lot of people there. This has just been really a great opportunity to bring this project forward, and I think looking at our parks projects as we go forward, we're excited for this collaboration, to have a team of people, DPW, as well as the state and other organizations working with us. Charles River Watershed Association has been a great partner with us. So this is a project. It was also referred to earlier about the centralization of the project on the north side at Albemarle. I just want to remind everybody, we do have a phase 2 marked out for Albemarle, which is the south side of the park, and we'll certainly be open to looking at opportunities for stormwater improvements in that project as well. And we're also working on other areas of the Charles. I think McGrath Park got mentioned earlier. So certainly using all of our open space areas to be a part of making this a major goal of committing to our stormwater improvements and stormwater management plan. So thanks so much. Great presentation.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, now we've got one for everybody here. So this is a little question, but we'd love your input on it. I think Amber is going to try and launch our Zoom poll. And something that we think should be part of this project is some good interpretive signage, and you've seen a little bit about what's included in the project. We'd love to get your feedback on what you think would be impactful, where it should go, what would be important things to kind of communicate and highlight. And in this room, we'll just talk, but folks who are online, please just click through, jot down and answer really quickly. But yeah, so interpretive signage could be at this arcing infiltration system, could be scattered throughout the park, could be along the banks.
By the bridges.
By the bridges.
Yeah, the new bridge.
The other thing regarding the bridges, there are a bunch of historic bridges in storage that have been taken down.
Yeah,
That could be a great fit for a project like this in terms of beautification. And
we
So-
say.
so my mother-in-law used to work for a Mass Historic Commission.
Yeah.
And they take down a lot of old historic bridges for, upgrading and these bridges have apparently gone into storage somewhere. And so there are opportunities to maybe take something old and repurpose it,
To bring back a historic bridge. Wow, that's a very exciting.
because you've
Idea.
seen what the
Yeah.
bridges look like that are currently there.
Okay.
The one that got torn down
Yeah.
and redone, it's not a good looking bridge, but it gets the job done, so.
Okay, that's a great comment. Locate signs kind of near those pedestrian bridges.
Well, also the places where people frequent, like where the pool is and where the playground is. Because those are places that, I don't know whether the Parks and Rec is still gonna have some sort of a community building, but places where people
Are already.
are already congregating or
It'd also be a great project to get the schools involved with, both Pheasant and Dade Middle School.
Yes.
Especially since those kids hang out and they're super curious about the water and the brook. And so it would be nice for them and for the teachers who aren't necessarily Newton people to sort of have an understanding of what's happening and the whole process.
Yeah.
It could be a great learning opportunity.
Great, we're gonna try and get into the FA day to give a presentation as part of this project, so.
I don't know how many people actually like read those signs.
Yeah.
that Are out there.
I'm a sign reader, I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people aren't, but I think, I mean, isn't there a whole sort of public education part of this also about, like, all the people in this neighborhood, if their properties, if they kept the water on their property and didn't let it go into the storm drains by having
Yeah,
like
rain
structures
gardens on
in
their property, yeah.
or rain gardens or whatever, I mean, wouldn't that help with the Cheesecake Brook problem?
Would, yeah.
And is that part of this whole project to do that kind of public education?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just relaunch our presentation here. We'll just get back into it. So kind of what we're gonna talk about next is the restoration plan, which is everything that's not getting implemented right now. So, you know, last year we spent a lot of time putting together this big picture, kind of long-term conceptual plan, everything kitchen sink that we can do to take care of Cheesecake Brook. And ultimately, this plan identified 86 different kind of unique project opportunities and about 15 different kind of techniques that we called them. You know, I'll move a little bit quickly through this, but we started with a really detailed field survey, kind of looking at the conditions of the brook in these different sections of the brook that we talked about. And we thought about restoration plans restoration approaches that made sense in each different location of the brook. So, you know, for instance, there's you know, a section of the brook, especially in the headwaters where it's really runs through people's backyards. And that's a location where homeowner education is gonna be incredibly important. But I'll give you a glimpse, a kind of deeper glimpse of this. You know, this is what the kind of restoration plan looks like. It's a mix of locations, techniques, and then kind of estimates of whether this could be something that could be done on a short term or on a longer term. I just want to be clear, you know, this is something that CRWA did as part of a grant funded project, and we hope to work with the city of Newton on many of these initiatives, but this is not something that the city is committing to or, you know, has you know, plans to implement. You know, one thing that's important is simply invasive plant removal. So, you know, this along the Albemarle corridor above Watertown Street, where it gets really woody, there's a lot of bittersweet in particular. And then up in the headwaters near McGrath, there's a lot of Japanese knotweed. So, you know, these are areas where, you know, doing something small like getting out and removing invasives with volunteers could make a big difference.
That's not small.
Well, yes, not small, but
I'll just say.
yeah, you're right. But it's something that we can do with our hands. You know, another thing that we looked at is locations where there's just very active erosion. And you can see that especially farther down Albemarle where there aren't those asphalt swales kind of into that neighborhood. You know, you probably know it very well. There's places where people park and there's just, you know, a lot of sediment and getting into the brook. You know, this is kind of a more ambitious idea, but looking at outlet stabilization, you know, there are places where the brook walls have started to collapse. There are places where there are outfalls that are kind of caving in or eroding portions of the brook walls. And this is, you know, one example of how that can be treated. And then finally, the really big one is bank naturalization. You know, this is, I just kind of purely putting on my CRWA hat. You know, those masonry bank walls were built in 1937. If you go out today and take a walk, you'll see places where they are collapsing. There's gonna be a time to redo this. And I think there is a way to
to do some bank naturalization in a way that doesn't disturb the MWA pipe or doesn't disturb the gas utilities. And we've got a little bit of time to try and figure out what that is and get to a consensus plan that hopefully doesn't cost $100 million or seem like a non-starter. And then, so this is from Fuller Brook, which we did a site tour of recently, and it's just a really great example. It was another brook that was built by the Works Public Administration, looked very, very similar, with a little bit more space than Cheesecake, but very, very similar. And it's just a stunning restoration. Tons of dragonflies, you can see fish in the brook in different places, amazing diversity of plants. So I think it's a great we can't translate it perfectly, but it's a great inspiration for us.
How much of Cheesecake Brook is covered over?
I think it's about 1 mile that's underground. I might have that wrong, but yeah. All right, and then we're gonna talk really quickly about what else is happening. You're saying, okay, this project is this, but what else? It's gonna take many, many of these projects to make a difference. And I'm gonna grab Eric back up here to talk about some other projects that really are in the hopper that are gonna potentially make a difference for Cheesecake Brook.
Yep, so like I said earlier, it's really about, finding the right place throughout the city that we can put a project like this. You need, open land, you need good soils, and you also need proximity to some kind of drainage pipe that you can intercept easily. So that includes, you could have a drain pipe that's some 8 feet down, and that's a bit hard to route to a system, especially if groundwater is high. But in this case, we found an opportunity here at McGrath Park. If you see right there on the right, we have Cheesecake Brook that pretty much cuts the park diagonally. And feeding into that culvert is the drain line that goes down Myrtle Street. So we found an opportunity here, again, one that lines up with a development for Parks and Rec. But we are putting in another kind of subterranean system that will intercept that Myrtle Street drain line, retain volume, prevent extra volume from going into the brook. We're also putting in some bioretention basins similar to Albemarle that is going to service any kind of development that happens at the park. So any ADA accessible walkways. And in general, this is going to treat, about 2 acres of impervious area, remove around 3.5. So it's on a much smaller scale, but it's something that we have to slowly chip away at. And then another thing that we are currently investigating and doing, feasibility assessments of is the Davis Playground. So we have this Waltham Street drain line that feeds directly into Cheesecake Brook. If you see at the bottom of the park, that's, another culverted section of Cheesecake Brook right before it daylights. And we have Waltham Street drain line as well as the River Street drain line that feeds directly into it. So we're looking at potentially intercepting that and again, feeding it into a large subterranean chamber with a possible overflow connection. Very similar.
I'm sorry.
So this is the
Waltham
Davis
Street?
Playground. Yep. So
Where's Waltham Street on this map?
Yeah. Waltham Street is right here on the left.
The CVS is at the bottom.
Right
Right there. Okay, that's
Mhm.
CVS.
That's
That's the
Davis.
Davis School.
Yeah,
All day school.
and this is the
Family
playground.
access.
Access.
Family access. Okay,
Yeah.
that playground. All right.
Mhm.
In behind, there's a softball field.
Yes.
Unused, yeah.
This project is so cool because also this is Cheesecake Brook
Right here.
right here.
Right.
And then it flows
That's what I'm saying.
beneath the police station parking lot.
Right.
And this is CRWA's field office. We didn't even realize that we were right on Cheesecake Brook for a little while.
Oh.
Historically, there was a swimming area, way back.
Really?
Yeah, and some of the old,
In the brook?
well, in that general area, yeah, well, I think they must have dammed the brook. Yeah.
So from the school, kids would
What's that?
What from the school there, the old?
Well, I mean, I think it was a town swimming area, from what I read. You know,
Where?
in that general area, right, where, that's where Cheesecake kind of goes under, or it emerges actually, right?
Yeah, it's like culverted right here. That's where it goes underground. Or, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, if you kind of walk this site, you can see, you know, a really big granite slab that's kind of the top of the, you know, the old culvert. From when, you know, when it was Dave, but when it wasn't. But like I was saying, the city is constantly looking at opportunities where we can find a drain line that we can easily intercept and feed it into a, you know, neighboring parcel with good soils. You know, it's feasible to redevelop there and ultimately chip away at this. And this has a potential of treating several acres of both Waltham Street and River Street. So this could be a very beneficial project.
Is this going to be done, or is it just a?
This is still in planning. We're still doing feasibility assessments, so, you know, soil evaluations. We're, you know, looking at the inverts, seeing what's it gonna take, basically. And these are just two of the projects that we're looking at within the Cheesecake Brook subwatershed. Yeah, and then finally, I mean, what I'm trying to ground us all in is that we've got a restoration, you know, we've got a restoration plan. We have a sense of what it's gonna take to really get the brook where it needs to be. It's gonna take a lot of different projects in different places, and some of them are kind of already happening. And another one that's happening is up in the golf course. Brayburn is doing wet meadow restoration that's gonna be kicking off in the fall of 2025. So they've done a little bit of wet meadow restoration already, and they're doing more. And we're gonna try and get a little bit of, we're hoping to work with them to kind of be able to show that off and see that expand as much as possible.
And is that a named brook?
Well, it's part of the headwater, this is the headwaters of Cheesecake Brook.
Okay.
This is what it looks like if you walk all the way up to the top of the hill, yeah. You know, so next steps on February 12th, there's gonna be a groundbreaking for this, you know, phase one project. We'll be organizing a restoration walk in the spring, and then probably a bio blitz with Newton conservators in the summer. So, you know, what we're really trying to do is really document the conditions as they are today and be in a position to kind of see and understand improvement as we kind of chip away both at water quality and at kind of increasing habitat through the brook. And I've got kind of one more poll for all of us. You know, these projects really only are gonna happen if all the people in this room and all the people online and a lot of people who aren't here yet really care and feel like this is important. So, you know, a big piece of this is organizing public events that get people out there to understand Cheesecake Brook and to imagine kind of its potential future. So again, folks online, please take this poll for us. And for all of us in person, we can have a little brainstorming about different, you know, events or opportunities to kind of get out on the brook together.
Are you talking about like, community building events?
Exactly.
So we had the first, statewide Good Neighbor Day in fall of this year. My husband was involved in that through his work. And, the section of Albemarle that I live on, the upper end between, Watertown and Washington Streets, we did a Good Neighbor Day event at our house, and we invited neighbors from all that whole section of Albemarle Road to come, and we had a potluck. And we had a drumming circle, it was a lovely fall day, and that way we got to know our neighbors. So if, you know, if this organization can get involved in Good Neighbor Day, which is gonna be an annual event, and do more such small neighborhood things, then that builds community. And for us that are planning on aging in place in our homes, myself and my husband being one of those. It's great to get to know your neighbors farther and farther out from, your next door neighbors and beyond, because that builds intentional communities and helps with social isolation and loneliness. It helps newcomers orient younger families, for people like myself who have lived in this neighborhood for so many years, almost 3 decades. Yeah, so
Hey,
I would be
that's a great-
interested in helping with something like that. I'm sorry, right now, but she has my contact.
I was thinking another great place to do a community potluck would be right at the end of the brook, where the Blue Heron Bridge is. You have an accessible sort of boardwalk, open area with the bridge at both sides. That could be a really fun place to do a little, you could walk and you could
Yeah.
end up at the end.
That bridge is so
That would be
amazing.
fun,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I
when
could
they,
help out with something like that.
yeah, and when they launched, they did a small, at the total upper end of, Albemarle by Eddy Street. They did a little project there several years ago where they beautified the park, and that was, I think, Community Preservation Act funding. And, then Mayor, David Coleman had like a little ribbon cutting ceremony, and they served cheesecake. So, yeah, like community building, I would get involved in community building events like that.
What if we did like, hands-on, invasive plant pull or something along the road? Cause, then we would feel like we were helping, right?
My husband
Thank you.
wants to do put his canoe in wherever he can, and he wants to prove that it's a viable water source, so. He's not here tonight.
He's gonna need all of us out there with our hoses.
Okay.
This is kind of a joke, but
to be that 25-year storm.
this, we do the run of we used to do the run
Oh,
of Charles,
good, yeah.
but Jim's like, well, I want to prove that this is a viable water source, so you could have a canoe event where, I'm kind of joking, but.
Run of the
Fred
cheesecake.
Flintstone canoe with your legs.
I wanted seconding the canoe cleanup.
Okay, canoe cleanup.
They would put their canoe in.
Yeah,
Excellent.
yeah, so we have,
I kayaked it from Cheesecake Brook down to the Watertown Square. Down to the dam, just before the dam.
okay.
It's doable. I mean, there was only one, actually going the other way, going west, I had to get out, but no, we were able to do it. Yeah.
Another time when a lot of people gather is 4th of July.
Oh, yeah, down there.
Around the brook. I mean, literally.
This is gonna be done before that.
Yeah,
There is a,
There was
or at least part of it.
when they have the turf field.
Yeah, they are selling. 4th of July.
I'll say that I know that they're planning the construction schedule very carefully to make sure that 4th of July can happen.
This year, but
Make that the last one with fireworks and move to a drone show.
No.
so there is a, they used to, and I brought this up in the last meeting, but, Albemarle Road used to be called Cheesecake Brook Boulevard. Because it is truly a boulevard, the road runs on each side of a, in this case, a waterway, but, we'd love to see potential renaming of Albemarle Road.
Cause no one can spell Albemarle.
Or say it.
It humiliates our staff on a weekly
Our
basis.
staff, or just me?
No, not just
Cheesecake
you.
Brook Boulevard. Perfect.
That was the original name, so a
That's a great thing.
restoration back to the original name of the.
Yeah.
Great idea.
So wasn't there a golf course
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
Because my father played, whenever he's passed, but he played golf there as a 10-year-old. He would be 92 now.
That's why
He
they
played the state champion, I think, when he was.
Fairway Lane.
Yeah.
Fairway.
Bunker Lane.
Yeah.
Fairway Drive.
And every time we drove by, he'd say, oh, I played golf here. And I was like,
So that's kind of a really interesting thing is to see if, Jackson Homestead has some historical information that could be incorporated into, some of the ideas that, we talked about restoring some of the bridges, but some other photographs or any kind of
The golf course is kind of,
Yeah.
This one's only done with 40.
All right, well, thank you so much. I apologize to everybody who's online because you haven't heard the amazing ideas that just came out in this conversation. But it looks like we've got some good interest in site walks on the Bio Blitz, and we will be following up.
I know that.
But there's a, they can hear.
Okay, they can hear, that's great. All right, well, I'm just gonna kind of wrap us up. Thank you all so much for coming out and for, caring about the brook and paying attention to the process. And, if anyone has some burning questions, speak up now, but otherwise, here's how you can get in touch with us later on. All right, thank you, everybody.